How is a certain dimension of Nietzschean aboriginal um, deconstruction, when, yeah, it was already known in Nietzsche's time, so that's interesting. We don't usually call Nietzsche a deconstructionist, but rather nihilist. But Kant had already undergone to some um, revolutionary uh, zeal, this kind of deconstructive project. But he had said in many key places, this could as well stand. This could as well stand. This we could as well just take from common sense. This is good enough. For instance, that uh, logic has come down to us basically from Aristotle in this form, or that the division between uh, physics or the outside ethics, or that which specifically concerns the human being, and logic, or that which has to do with language, or the way language helps us to determine or define things. This was already arose a little while after Plato or so, and Kant would say, I think Kant said, yeah, this is okay. This can stand forever, and other similar cases. And then he said, um, but only it would be better if we knew how to deduce this. We know that this arose empirically, as it were. Empirical is a loaded word because it's in Kant's time. It's caught in a specific polemic, specific divisions, and exactly how we want to say what empirical means without saying, oh, it means the philosophy of David Hume or something, which is a very complicated sort of empiricism. But it arose because, see, notice isn't it somewhat different if we say it arose historically, and then we add that who are the sources we look into, and what we think is somewhat different from if we say it arose empirically, as though we were going to ask some kind of somebody who did experiments to go get some kind of plausible theory on how this, why this happened, or something, or I don't know. Empirical. Is empirical exactly always the same as historically? Well, it arose de facto, under some understanding of the world, whether the understanding of the British, while they had the empire, and while the empire was some kind of magnificent jeweled pendant hanging from the royal collar, and how did India look at that moment, and how did people think in that moment about what the role of higher ideas was? And then, yeah, you see it. You have, depending on who you're talking to, you'd have a different vocabulary for expressing this, something like the difference between empirical and historical, and the difference between the de facto and the de jure, and what the figures and logic said, rather than what those two spheres said. Questions like that. So even there, you already have this kind of Begriff issue, right? You already see a kind of Hegel, the snowflakes of Hegel, or the little flitting birds, butterflies, bugs of Hegel, coming in as the what would become anthropology, I suppose, is the simplest way to illustrate that. or ethnology, um, which I think it's more commonly called, or at least it was in England. I think Alan McFarland, the Cambridge guy, calls himself an anthropologist, so I guess they use the term anthropology at Cambridge. But this respect and this treating as simply the case of the anthropologist, of the diversity of the full human world, rather than of ideology or something like that. Ideology, I think the simplest way to say what ideology would mean, that the ideas are secondary on what happens economically. So it's not actually necessary. I think Marxist theory isn't necessarily historical. Yeah, Engels did. I know Engels talked about the rising branch of history and all that. But it's not necessarily has to be conceived historically, because you could say when these and these economic conditions materially emerge and the economy is based on these and these factors, this is the type of ideas that come to power. So it's ahistorical. It's like a form of dogmatic I am that I am philosophy, or as it were. It's a form of, I mean, if you fasten yourself in that Exodus 3:14 passage where there's this Tyndale version is still saying, right around the time of the Reformation, right around the time of Luther and so on, the Tyndale version is still saying, I shall be that I shall be. And then the other version is saying, I am that I am, which is in keeping with the kind of philosophical, scientific version, which says there can be law that's eternal. There can be a aboriginal foundation that will come as the vicar of truth to us. And we will know these and these laws. And that's what Marx is kind of saying. These and these laws could always maintain, but they have to do with the material, the economic, with how people make a living. Are they herdsmen? Are they building iron railways or whatever? How they make a living has something lawfully derivable in terms of what the ideas that are in power in the cave of that community would be. In the the political discussion of that community, rather than the discussion which comes to reason out of the all the negatives that come into the political discussion in the cave. I think if you then say that here with anthropology doesn't see in anthropology you're immediately unsure of your ground, because are you from that I am that I am is as a now, which is Heidegger's criticism also, that he shows not because of the variety of anthropoids, or as it were, the variety of thinking animals, or rational animals, because rationality turns out to have all kinds of different meanings. For instance, that Strauss says, if we find out that material sciences can never tell us anything about conscience, about the moral conscience, then it becomes rational to take a leap away from them in the Kierkegaardian sense. Then rational no longer has just one clear meaning anymore. And then you could just expand that in the sense of Nous at the beginning of the Odyssey, when it says that Odysseus has just come across these different Nous of the different ethnos. or ethnoi. There you have. Also, by the way, we know that the ancient Israelites, the Yahwehs as they're called, by throwing the concept back on them, they didn't call themselves that. That they didn't have the word is. They didn't have the word is because the word is in modern Hebrew. We know when it was developed. We also know that rabbis studying the Greek philosophers had to coin a word for that, which was a different word in the Middle Ages. A different word than is used in current Hebrew. But given all these conditions, Heidegger then says, yes, still we could spot this moment when we go into that specific first beginning, which would be like the anthropology of the West, of the is, of the was ist, of the is, which is answered, however, by Parmenides in a way that's then taken to be is the available, and in the highest sense is the this knowledge that there's something that's always available as the support of everything else, in the same sense that any particular thing can be destroyed. This redwood, for instance, it could burn down, it could be destroyed, and forgetting a theory of the ultimate preservation of all matter. Supposing it didn't just become small particles and then reform somewhere else, supposing part of it could be actually destroyed, then the final availability would be this first mover, which supports everything, even if in every other sense things are destroyed. So that's the kind of a thought that gives itself as a sort of a profound basic of some kind, as Aboriginal thought. It seems like a foothold in some way, but it turns out that you could think about it as just like one more start point alongside a bunch of other start points. Once you start to, here's what the Hindus are thinking, here's what some others were thinking, these others over here. The newer people didn't have a concept of time. They didn't have the word time, at least, so they can talk about it. Although they could say 3 sleeps ago there was a water buffalo by the etc., etc. And there's these different conditions for cognizing comprise what Hegel's the second cave of history, Hegel's second cave of history, Strauss calls it. And again, in the chaos that Nietzsche's then stirring up in that flitting about, and which we have with the presentism problem, then Husserl's messing around with the psychologism, where psychology is claiming a special right of place over logic, as though psychology could be more important than logic. That's one of the big things in Husserl that Heidegger claims to overcome. So this is a lot of the reason why Heidegger and Husserl intellectually had to kind of falling out. And the simple way into that is to say Hermann Lotze, his theory of validity was carried over into Husserl, and it conceals with it a sense that psychologically somebody has to be there to affirm and validate, say this is a fact. So this validation theory is, Heidegger said, that's a form of psychologism, and it was smuggled into Husserl through Lotze, and even though Husserl was a great opponent of psychologism and trying to rid himself of it, he didn't quite get there.